She worked in silence, as if the world around her had been muted. Not a single word, not a single wasted movement. Just the slow, measured click of metal against metal, and the faint whisper of a cleaning rod through steel. Why did she always look so calm when her hands were on that weapon? Sarah Martinez sat alone in the armory, the kind of solitude that only existed at dawn on an army base. The Barrett M82A1 stretched across the table like a sleeping predator, heavy and unflinching. It was more than a rifle to her. It had always been more than a rifle. To most soldiers, weapon maintenance was a chore. To Sarah, it was ritual. She learned it from her grandfather, a Marine sniper who had returned from Vietnam with haunted eyes but steady hands. He had taught her that a clean weapon was a reliable weapon, and that reliability meant coming home. So every Sunday morning, while others slept off Saturday nights or sat in chapel, Sarah retreated here, where the world was still and the air smelled faintly of gun oil. Her motions were precise. Disassemble, inspect, wipe, polish, reassemble. Every part gleamed beneath the fluorescent light. Each piece fit together again with a soft metallic click, like a puzzle only she knew by heart. And that was when she sensed it, the quiet shift in air behind her. Sarah straightened, slowly turned, and froze. A woman stood in the doorway, battle dress crisp, boots polished to an impossible shine. Silver hair braided back, stars on her collar. General Patricia Henderson. Sarah's pulse jumped. She'd never been this close to a general before, let alone the Henderson, famous for her brilliant strategies and fiercer loyalty to her troops. Sarah snapped to attention so fast the stool nearly toppled over. The general didn't speak. Her eyes scanned the spotless rifle, then drifted lower, pausing on Sarah's chest. On the small rectangle of metal pinned just above her heart. Sarah blinked, her marksmanship badge, nothing unusual about it, or so she thought. But Henderson's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, like she'd spotted something that shouldn't exist. The silence stretched, only the distant hum of generators filled it. Then, without a word, the general turned and walked away. Sarah stood alone again, heart hammering, trying to understand why a simple cleaning ritual had just drawn the gaze of one of the most powerful women in the U.S. military. What she didn't know was that Henderson was already on her way to the personnel office to pull Sarah's entire military record. And by the time the file hit her desk an hour later, the general's coffee had gone cold, because the numbers staring back at her didn't make sense. Not for someone this young. Not for anyone. She worked in silence, as if the world had been turned down to a whisper. No music, no chatter, no boots stomping past the armory door. Only the soft metallic clicks of disassembly and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Why did she always look so calm when her hands were on that weapon? Sarah Martinez sat at the far corner of the armory, where the dim morning light from the high windows painted pale slashes across the concrete floor. The Barrett M82A1 lay stretched across the table like some dormant predator, long, heavy, patient. Most soldiers treated weapon maintenance like a chore. Sarah treated it like a ceremony. Her grandfather had taught her that. He had been a Marine sniper in Vietnam, though he never spoke of what he saw there. What he did talk about was care, the care that saved lives. A clean weapon was a reliable weapon, and reliability, he'd always told her, was the difference between coming home or not. So every Sunday, while the rest of the base was still waking or sleeping off Saturday nights, Sarah sat here alone. Methodical, unhurried, reverent. The rest of the world dissolved when she worked like this. Barrel, receiver, bolt, scope. Each piece disassembled, inspected, wiped clean until it gleamed under the fluorescent glow. Every part placed back into position with a soft click, like solving a puzzle only she understood. Her mind wandered as her hands worked. The regiment would soon deploy to Afghanistan. Training exercises were coming fast now, each more demanding than the last. She thought of Montana, of the endless plains where she grew up hunting deer with her father and listening to stories from her mother's army days. Out there, shots echoed for miles and no one flinched. Here, every shot meant something more. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway at first. Not until the air shifted, just enough to raise the hair on her neck. She turned and froze. A tall woman stood framed in the doorway, her uniform sharp, boots immaculate, silver hair braided tight against her head, stars on her collar. General Patricia Henderson. Sarah's heart lurched. She rose instantly, snapping to attention so fast her stool rattled against the floor. Henderson. The name carried weight across the entire U.S. Army, the kind of commander soldiers spoke of in lowered voices, not out of fear but respect. Brilliant strategist, fierce advocate for her troops, a former sniper herself years ago when no one believed women belonged behind a scope. And now she was here watching Sarah. The general's gaze drifted slowly across the table, over the neatly organized cleaning kit, over the gleaming Barrett. Then her eyes shifted. Lower, to Sarah's chest. Her marksmanship badge. Sarah frowned slightly, though she kept her posture locked. The badge was regulation-placed, spotless, nothing unusual, but Henderson's stare lingered, not on the badge itself, but on the tiny metal bars mounted beneath it. They were quiet little things, almost invisible. But they told a story. One the general apparently understood. The silence thickened, Sarah's pulse beat in her ears. Then Henderson blinked, turned on her heel and walked out without a word. The armory door closed behind her with a hollow echo. Sarah stayed frozen in place long after she was gone, trying to understand why someone like that would care about someone like her. What she didn't know was that Henderson walked straight from the armory to the base personnel office, and within the hour, a thick manila file was on her desk. And what she saw inside made her coffee go cold. The numbers didn't make sense. They weren't just high. They were impossible. Sarah had never scored below perfect. Not once. Not in basic training. Not in advanced marksmanship. Not even in sniper qualification, where even seasoned shooters struggled to break 90% on windy days. Every single test, every condition, every rifle. Perfect. There were notes from instructors, their tone half admiration, half disbelief. She'd shattered range records that had stood untouched for decades. Shots from distances most shooters couldn't even see. Crosswinds, heat shimmer, moving targets, it didn't seem to matter. Her grouping stayed tight, surgical. Henderson dialed the number of Master Sergeant Collins, the chief marksmanship instructor on base. When he answered, his voice held that gruff casualness of a man not easily impressed. Until she said the name. Martinez. A pause. Then a laugh, short and disbelieving. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like her." He told Henderson what she had already suspected. At first they thought it was beginner's luck. Then they suspected her equipment. They tore down her rifles, checked her scopes, weighed her ammo, calibrated her optics. Every time, everything came back perfect. It wasn't the gear. It was her. He described watching her hit bullseyes at 800 yards in winds that made other shooters miss at 300. How she moved through drills like she was alone on the range, calm, detached, like nothing could reach her once she settled behind the scope. And maybe nothing could. Even more curious was her humility. She never bragged, never volunteered her scores, never even seemed aware she was being watched. The instructors would quietly bring visiting officers just to see her shoot, and she would look faintly confused by the audience. "She just doesn't seem to know she's extraordinary," Collins said, "and maybe that's why she is." Henderson hung up and leaned back in her chair. This wasn't just skill. This was something rarer, something almost no amount of training could manufacture. Potential. Raw, unfiltered, unassuming potential. She sat for a long while, the only sound in her office the soft buzz of the fluorescent light above. Then she closed the file. By the time the sun rose fully over the base, Henderson had already made her decision. Sarah had no idea. She spent that Monday morning lost in the blur of formation, the smell of dew on the parade field, the clatter of boots on concrete, until Sergeant Williams appeared from the crowd, his expression unreadable, and handed her a folded slip of paper. Report to General Henderson, 900. Her stomach lurched. In 3 years of service, she had never been summoned by a general. The highest rank she'd ever spoken to was a colonel, and that had been during an inspection. The walk to headquarters felt longer than any march she'd ever done. Her boots clicked on the polished hallway floors like drumbeats, her pulse echoing with them. She couldn't think of anything she'd done wrong, but guilt had a way of sneaking in even when you were innocent. Her uniform was regulation perfect, her conduct spotless, her performance reviews glowing. So why did she feel like she was about to stand trial? The general's aide, a young lieutenant with nerves wrapped in starch, ushered her into a waiting room. The walls were lined with framed photographs, Henderson shaking hands with presidents, NATO commanders, soldiers from half the world. Sarah sat alone under their gazes. Her palms were damp. The door opened. Henderson stepped in like the air belonged to her. "Specialist Martinez," she said evenly, "sit." Sarah obeyed. The general didn't start with accusations. She started with questions. Where Sarah came from, why she joined, how long she'd been shooting. Sarah answered simply, honestly. She spoke of Montana winters, hunting with her father, the quiet steadiness of her grandfather, the way marksmanship felt like meditation, how the world always went silent the moment she focused through a scope. But she spoke like it was nothing special, like these things were common, like anyone could do them. Henderson listened, and Sarah noticed how piercing her eyes were. She seemed to see past the words, searching for something else underneath. Finally, the general spread a stack of papers across the table between them. Shooting scores, training evaluation, commendations. Line after line of perfect numbers. Sarah blinked at them, confused. "Yes, ma'am, those are mine." "You've never missed," Henderson said quietly. "I just try my best," Sarah said, almost apologetic. "No," Henderson corrected. "Most people try, they miss, you don't." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never thought of her shooting as remarkable, just the result of practice. She had never compared her scores to anyone else's, never felt the need. The general leaned back, studying her. And then she said it. "There are units," she began, "that need people like you." The words landed like distant thunder. Special operations, missions where precision isn't just useful, it's everything, where one mistake 1 millimeter can cost lives. Henderson paused. You could save them. The room went very still. Sarah's breath caught. Special operations. That world had always felt galaxies away from her quiet existence as a line soldier. She wasn't sure if the surge she felt in her chest was fear or hope. "Think about it," Henderson said, rising. "This is not a decision to make lightly. You'll speak with a few people who have done it, and if you say no, no one will hold it against you." She left Sarah sitting alone with the papers. The door clicked shut and the silence returned, heavy, electric, alive with possibility. Sarah stared down at the neat rows of perfect scores. The record of a life she hadn't known was extraordinary. She thought of Montana again, the cold mornings, the quiet forests, the way her grandfather's hands never trembled even when his voice did. Was this what he had prepared her for all along? She didn't know. Not yet. But something in her knew this. The life she had come here to live might be about to change forever. The air was colder underground. Sarah noticed it the moment the heavy steel door sealed shut behind her. The classified briefing room had no windows, no clocks, no sound except the quiet hum of ventilation. The walls were bare concrete, the table bolted to the floor. She sat with 5 other specialists, none of them speaking, each one carved from silence. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, badges from everywhere but names that meant nothing here. The mission would erase those. Colonel Barnes stood at the far end of the table, a digital map glowing in the dark behind him. He spoke in clipped, unhurried sentences, his voice stripped of emotion. High-value target. Mountainous terrain. Tunnel network. Civilian risk too high for airstrikes. Capture operation. Sarah Overwatch. The words sank through her like stones. This was real, not training, not rehearsal. There would be no instructors calling ceasefire if things went wrong. If she missed, people would die. If she hesitated, her team would be trapped. Barnes' eyes flicked to her only once, but it was enough. He knew who she was now, Henderson's prodigy, the one who never missed. Sarah kept her face still and her breathing steady. But inside, her hands felt cold. They planned for 3 days. Satellite imagery, wind models, terrain profiles. They studied the mountain ridges from every angle, tracing paths through the rocks, measuring distances down to the centimeter. Sarah memorized every tree, every shadow, every possible line of sight between her position and the compound 1,500 meters away. While the others discussed breach points and escape routes, she stayed quiet, seeing only the shot. The wind angles at dawn, the way the air thinned with altitude, the slight curve of the earth over distance, all the invisible things that could betray her. The team rehearsed until the movements were muscle memory. They packed and repacked gear. They practiced emergency extractions in the dark. And when they finally flew out under the cover of night, Sarah sat silent in the dim red glow of the transport bay, her Barrett across her lap, her heart steady in her chest. She didn't tell anyone she was afraid. Dawn was still an hour off when she crawled into position. The mountain air cut through her like glass, 11,000 feet, thin, sharp, freezing. She had been prone on the rocky outcrop for 6 hours by then, body stiff, mind locked in stillness. Below, the compound lay quiet, lights burning faint in the dark. The rest of the team moved like shadows across the lower slopes, too far away to see with the naked eye. She tracked their heat signatures through her scope, tiny flickers of life in a sea of black. Her job was simple: see everything, and kill only if she had to. The mission depended on silence. If a single alarm went off, the targets would vanish into their tunnels and be gone forever. So her weapon stayed on safe, her fingers straight and still, waiting. Time stretched, her world narrowed to crosshairs and breath. Then she saw him. A sentry on the outer wall, half hidden behind a collapsed section of stone. Not on the satellite images, not in the briefings, just there, watching the dark. Sarah whispered the coordinates into her radio. The team leader acknowledged. They kept moving. Then a second sentry stepped into view near the east corner, raising a radio to his mouth. Her heart clenched. This was it. If he spoke into that radio, the mission was over. "Permission to engage," she whispered. A beat of silence, then cleared. Sarah exhaled. Wind 2 knots from left to right. Distance 1,482 meters. Elevation +12 mils. Target moving. She slowed her breathing until she could feel her heartbeat between her teeth. The world went very quiet, very far away. She squeezed the trigger. The suppressed shot was barely more than a whisper. The man fell before the radio hit the ground. The second sentry never knew. The team slid past undetected. When it was over, Sarah didn't move. The team had breached, cleared, and captured 3 high-value targets in less than 5 minutes. She had watched it all through her scope, her world framed in glass. When enemy fighters finally counterattacked during the exfil, she had shifted into covering fire, quick, sharp, clean. Every threat she marked went down before they could fire. And then just like that, silence. Dust drifted. Smoke curled from shattered stone. The helicopters lifted the team out of the valley like ghosts vanishing back into the dark. Sarah stayed behind until the last echo of rotor blades faded. Only then did she lower her rifle and let herself breathe again. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. They debriefed in silence. The others spoke in calm, clinical tones, logging times and coordinates, listing recovered intel. No one said her name. They didn't need to. Everyone knew the mission had hinged on a single quiet shot at dawn. Later, alone in her bunk, she sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off, listening to the soft hum of the ventilation and the faint murmur of voices through the walls. She had killed a man. There had been no ceremony to it, no recoil of conscience, just the cold mechanical fact of it, so clean it almost felt unreal. She told herself it had saved lives, that it had saved her team. It still felt heavy. She remembered what Rodriguez had told her in that cafe months ago. The shot is easy, living with it is. Now she understood what he meant. General Henderson called 2 days later. The line was secure, her voice as calm as ever, though Sarah thought she heard something like relief buried beneath it. "I read the reports," Henderson said. "You did well." Sarah hesitated. "It doesn't feel like well, it just feels quiet." "That's how it should feel," Henderson said. "Quiet means everyone came home." Sarah didn't reply. She wasn't sure she believed that yet. 3 months later, there was no time to think about it. Her second mission came fast, this time on the other side of the world. Different terrain, different target, same stakes. She was no longer a curiosity, they expected her now. The silence around her had changed. It wasn't doubt anymore, it was trust. That made it heavier somehow. The night before insertion, she lay awake on the floor of a dim safe house, staring at the ceiling, her rifle beside her. She thought about Montana, about snow on the fence posts, her father teaching her to breathe with the trigger squeeze, about her grandfather's words by the fire. Precision is power. Power always costs something. She wondered how much it would cost her. When dawn came, she shouldered the Barrett and stepped out into the cold, feeling that familiar stillness settle over her again like armor. Not excitement, not fear, just the strange, calm silence that always came before she became what they needed her to be. A line of sight. A heartbeat in the distance. A ghost no one would ever see. By the end of that mission, no one doubted her anymore. She wasn't the quiet soldier who had once cleaned her weapon in solitude. She was something else now, something rarer, harder to name. A precision specialist. An anchor in chaos. A weight the others could lean on when everything else started to fall apart. And though Sarah never said it aloud, she knew what that meant. She would never really come back from this. But she would go anyway. Because somewhere out there, someone would be alive tomorrow. Because she stayed steady today. The silence followed her home. It clung to her even as the plane descended through the gray overcast, even as the hum of the engines became the distant rumble of trucks on the tarmac. She walked across the runway with her gear slung over her shoulder, boots striking dull against the concrete. People spoke around her, officers giving orders, ground crew waving wands, but it all sounded faint, muffled, like she was underwater. She had done everything right. The mission had been a success, but she couldn't remember anyone's faces from it. Only the shot, and the silence that came after. Her old unit barely recognized her when she stopped by the barracks a week later. They welcomed her with grins, pats on the back, jokes about how she'd gone special now. But they looked at her differently, like there was glass between them. She smiled when they smiled, laughed when they laughed, and said nothing about where she'd been. They didn't ask. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. Maybe she was too. When she walked back alone through the evening light, she caught her reflection in the window of the empty chow hall. She almost didn't recognize herself. The quiet girl from Montana who used to clean her Barrett in solitude was still there somewhere, but buried deeper now, beneath layers of discipline and silence, and something harder she didn't have a name for yet. She wasn't sure she liked who she was becoming. But she couldn't go back. Her third mission started differently. It wasn't the planning or the target that made it strange, it was her. For the first time she felt tired. Not physically, her body was sharp, trained, unyielding. But something inside her felt hollowed out, like she was running on echoes. They flew into a coastal region shrouded in fog, where the cliffs dropped sheer into black water and the wind howled like old ghosts. The target was a weapons broker moving shipments through the hills. There would be no margin for error. One warning shot and the entire network would scatter. Sarah lay in her hide for 18 hours, the ocean crashing below, the damp biting through her clothes until her bones felt soaked. She tracked movements through her scope, breathing in rhythm with the tide, heart slow as the waves. She fired only once. Perfect shot. Target down. Extraction clean. Everyone congratulated her afterward. She nodded, smiled, said nothing. But that night, back at base, she woke with her hands clenched like they were still gripping the rifle. And for the first time, she wondered how many more pieces of herself she could trade away to this work before there was nothing left to bring home. General Henderson saw it. They met briefly 2 days after she returned. Henderson had read the mission report, of course, but she studied Sarah's face like it held more data than any dossier could. "You look tired," she said quietly. "I'm fine." "No," Henderson said. "You're functioning, that's different." Sarah didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. The general leaned back in her chair, her expression softening just slightly. "This job will take from you," she said, "piece by piece. It doesn't ask permission." Sarah swallowed. Then why do it? Henderson's gaze didn't waver. "Because someone has to." They sat in silence for a long time after that. No answers, just understanding. The next mission nearly broke her. It wasn't the danger, it wasn't even the shot, it was everything after. The operation was meant to be simple, a capture of a known insurgent leader in the desert outskirts, minimal resistance expected. Sarah's role was overwatch from a rocky ridge. Distance, 1,200 meters, clear line of sight, textbook. Until it was. Midway through the approach, a dust storm rose out of nowhere, swallowing the horizon in a wall of ochre haze. Visibility dropped to 20 feet. Radio signals crackled into static. The team pressed on blindly toward the compound while Sarah lost sight of everything. Her scope showed only swirling grit. Her hands tightened on the rifle. Her mind calculated and recalculated winds she could no longer see. She thought of calling abort, but before she could, the storm broke just enough for her to glimpse movement. 3 figures emerging from the compound, rifles raised, closing fast on her team's flank. There was no time to warn them. No time for second shots. She fired 3 times in 7 seconds, through crosswinds that shifted like snakes. Each round struck clean. The team survived. The targets didn't. When they reached the compound, the primary target was gone, escaped in the chaos. They extracted empty-handed. Back at base, the after-action report listed her performance as exemplary under adverse conditions. But Sarah felt only the hollow thud of failure. She had killed 3 men and saved her team, but the mission had failed anyway. She sat alone in the gear bay that night, still wearing her dust-caked uniform, staring at her rifle on the bench beside her. It had done exactly what she asked. She wasn't sure she had. The silence was worse this time. Not the clean quiet after a perfect shot. This was the kind that echoed. She stopped answering calls from her old unit. She stopped going to the gym at regular hours, choosing the empty darkness of midnight instead. She found herself polishing her rifle long after it was already spotless, like she was trying to clean something from herself instead. One night she caught herself whispering numbers under her breath, wind speeds, distances, mil corrections, like a prayer. She stopped and sat frozen, hands shaking until the feeling passed. Rodriguez found her before she unraveled completely. He showed up unannounced, leaning in the doorway of the range like he had never left Delta at all. She hadn't seen him since that cafe months ago. He didn't smile. "Thompson called me," he said you're burning out." "I'm fine," she muttered. "No, you're brittle," he said. "Big difference." She said nothing. Rodriguez stepped closer, voice low. "Listen, you think carrying this weight means you have to carry it alone. You don't, none of us can." Something cracked in her at that. Maybe it was the word us. Like she wasn't some strange outlier, like she belonged. Rodriguez put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't lose yourself trying to be what they need. Be you first, or you'll disappear." Then he walked away, leaving her in the smell of gun oil and silence. Sarah didn't break that night. But she didn't sleep either. She lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, thinking about the version of herself who used to sit in the armory alone on Sunday mornings, cleaning her Barrett while the world was still. She wondered what that girl would think if she saw her now, if she'd be proud or afraid. Maybe both. By morning, the hollow space inside her hadn't vanished. But it felt quieter. Not gone, just acknowledged. She stood, pulled on her boots, and slung her rifle across her back. The weight felt familiar, real, grounding. She wasn't healed. But she wasn't lost either. Not yet. The next mission came quietly. No fanfare, no urgency in the briefing tone. Just a thin folder slid across the table, paper-clipped photos inside, and a single line typed on the cover sheet. Minimal collateral, zero margin for error. Sarah studied the file in silence while the others spoke. This time the target wasn't a battlefield commander or weapons dealer. It was a liaison, a man who moved like smoke between war zones, funding and coordinating attacks but never holding a gun himself. He would be attending a clandestine meeting in a dense urban quarter. No direct access. No breach teams. One shot. One chance. Henderson's voice crackled through the secure call at the end of the briefing. "You don't have to take this," she said. Sarah didn't look away from the photo. "I know." She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. They all knew she would go. The city was alive with noise when she arrived. It had been years since she'd walked through crowds. Real crowds. Shopkeepers shouting in foreign dialects, children darting between cars, motorcycles weaving through narrow alleys. The air was thick with spices, sweat, and diesel. And she moved through it like a ghost. Her hide was set in an abandoned apartment building across from the target location, 6 stories up, curtains nailed to the walls to kill light bleed, ventilation holes cut through crumbling plaster. She lay prone on a thin mat, her Barrett broken down beside her, every movement slow and deliberate. This was different from the mountains and deserts. Different from wind and distance and silence. Here the noise never stopped. Sarah closed her eyes and breathed until it blurred into background hum. Then she opened them and built her world around a single window across the street. The meeting began at dawn. 2 men, then 3, then 5. Her target arrived last, slight, composed, carrying nothing. He smiled as he entered, like a man arriving at his own funeral who didn't know it yet. Sarah settled behind her scope. Wind negligible. Distance 642 meters. Angle down 7 degrees. Her finger rested on the trigger, steady as stone. And then she saw it. A child. On the balcony just below the meeting room, crouched over a battered toy truck, eyes wide as she watched the quiet street. Sarah's heart stuttered. One ricochet, one fragment, one error, and the mission would carve itself into her forever. She eased her finger away from the trigger. Her voice stayed even in the comms. Stand by, civilian in potential hazard zone. Abort, the team leader asked. Negative, she said, adjusting. She shifted her position 2 inches, angling down through a narrow gap where the glass pane met the curtain. Barely enough clearance for the bullet to pass clean. Breath in. Half breath out. Stillness. She squeezed. The suppressed shot whispered through the morning. Her target folded soundlessly to the floor. The child didn't flinch. She never even looked up. Sarah exfiltrated with the dawn crowds, her rifle broken down into an innocuous duffel, her steps light, calm. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt intact. It was the first time in months she hadn't felt hollow after a shot. She thought of Henderson's words, how the job would take pieces of her if she let it, and realized something new. It didn't have to. Not if she stayed who she was inside the silence. That thought lingered all the way back to base. Henderson summoned her 2 days later. The general studied her across the desk, chin resting on one hand, expression unreadable. You disobeyed the original firing angle, Henderson said. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied evenly, for safety. A long pause. Then Henderson nodded once, good. It wasn't praise exactly, more like acknowledgement, respect. For the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something like pride in the general's eyes. Not because she had made the shot, because she had chosen how. The next weeks passed differently. Sarah still trained, still kept to herself, still cleaned her Barrett in the quiet, but something inside had shifted, not gone soft, just steadier, lighter. She called her parents. She even laughed with her old unit during a rare evening off. She found herself standing outside at night sometimes, staring at the stars like she used to do back in Montana, remembering how small she really was. It didn't make the work easier, but it made her feel human again. And that mattered. Then the hardest test came, one no one saw coming. It was supposed to be simple, overwatch for a joint rescue mission. A small recon team had been captured deep in enemy terrain. Sarah's job was to cover the extraction, nothing more. But nothing about the operation went as planned. The approach route was compromised. The enemy had reinforced faster than intelligence predicted. By the time Sarah was in position, the rescue team was already in contact, pinned down behind a ridge, radio calls breaking up in static. She could see flashes of gunfire through her scope, but not clear lines of fire. Too many rocks, too much distance. Every shot risked hitting her own people. Her breathing slowed anyway. She found angles, ricochets off stone, glancing shots to suppress without killing. Not textbook, not clean, but enough to buy seconds. She worked like she was sculpting air, one bullet at a time, carving windows for the team to move. They broke contact and reached the evac point with one casualty, wounded, not fatal. Sarah stayed until the last helicopter lifted off, her hands locked steady even as her shoulders trembled. When she finally lowered her rifle, her fingers were cramped, her throat raw from not breathing enough. She walked back alone through the moonlit rocks, rifle slung across her back, and for the first time in her career she felt something close to peace. Because she had done more than shoot. She had protected. And that was why she had joined in the first place. Henderson called her in the next morning, reading the after-action report in silence as Sarah stood at attention. When the general looked up, her voice was quieter than usual. "You saved them," Henderson said. Sarah hesitated. "I just did my job." "No," the general said. "You remembered what the job is." Something unknotted in Sarah's chest at that. She walked out of the office into the bright morning sunlight, the bass loud with the hum of engines and voices, and for once it didn't feel like it was all happening far away from her. It felt close, real, alive. She realized she was smiling. Not wide, just enough. The kind of smile you only get when you know you've been to the edge of yourself and walked back. The bass felt different now. Not louder, not busier, just closer. The voices in the mess hall didn't sound like distant echoes anymore. The clatter of boots on concrete, the smell of oil and hot metal in the hangars, she felt part of it again, not just a shadow moving between missions. Her task force had stopped treating her like an outsider, too. They didn't shower her with praise. They didn't need to. It was subtler than that. The way they glanced back to check if she was with them when they moved, the way they fell silent when she spoke in planning sessions. They trusted her. And trust, she was learning, was heavier than fear. The next mission made that weight real. It began with a simple phrase on the briefing slide: high risk, critical objective, no second chances. Colonel Barnes' voice was flat as he laid out the situation. A rogue militia had seized a biochemical lab in the mountains, holding scientists hostage and threatening to release a weaponized agent. Airstrikes were impossible, too much risk of breaching containment. A direct assault would trigger the hostages' deaths. The only plan left was the kind no one wanted to say aloud. A surgical strike. Precision fire through a ventilation port to destroy the weapon vials, without harming the hostages inside. One bullet. Through a gap the width of a hand. From 1,700 meters. Sarah said nothing during the briefing, but the entire room quietly turned toward her anyway. They deployed at dusk. The mountains rose black against a blood-red sky, the air thin and sharp with cold. The team moved like shadows through the scree slopes while Sarah climbed alone to the overwatch perch, a jagged ridge of fractured stone high above the valley. By midnight the world was silent. Through her scope, she could see the faint glow of lamps inside the lab compound. Men with rifles patrolled the catwalks. A ventilation stack jutted from the roof, its narrow metal slats trembling in the wind. Somewhere beneath that roof, 6 scientists knelt in a room surrounded by death waiting to happen. Sarah lay still as stone, her cheek against the stock, her breathing so shallow it barely fogged her scope. This was the most difficult shot she had ever faced. Not just because of distance or wind or angle. Because if she missed, children would be burying parents. She watched the slats sway in the crosswind, timed their rhythm, built the math in her mind like a fragile bridge: barometric pressure, Coriolis drift, spin drift, barrel harmonics, bullet coefficient. All the invisible ghosts between her and the target. And underneath it all, her heartbeat. Slow. Steady. Then her radio crackled. "Sarah, windows closing. They've armed the dispersal system." "Copy," she whispered. Her gloved finger rested on the trigger. The wind eased for half a heartbeat. That was all she would get. Breath in. Half breath out. Stillness. The rifle thundered softly against her shoulder. The suppressed muzzle flash lit her face for an instant, then vanished back into the dark. Through her scope, she watched the bullet travel like slow lightning, spinning through the night, slipping through the trembling slats of the vent, and striking the containment rack dead center. A bloom of white vapor burst inside the lab, instantly neutralized by the auto scrubbers before it could spread. The hostages flinched but remained unharmed. The militia guards scrambled in confusion as the rescue team breached from below, clearing the compound in seconds. It was over. One shot. One impossible thread pulled perfectly through the needle. Sarah didn't move for a long time. The world slowly came back. The hiss of the wind across the rocks, the distant shouts of the rescue team, the thrum of helicopter rotors rising from the valley floor. She rolled onto her back, staring up at the stars. Her hands were steady. Her chest was. She thought of her grandfather. How he'd said precision was power, and power always costs something. Tonight she finally understood the other half of that lesson. If you used it right, it could save something too. Back at base, no one celebrated. There were no speeches, no medals pinned. Just silent nods as they walked past her in the corridor, quiet claps on the shoulder that said more than words. Barnes said only, "Good work," but his eyes lingered longer than usual. That night Sarah sat alone in the armory again, the Barrett stretched across the table under the soft light. The same ritual as years ago, but different now. Not penance. Not obsession. Respect. She cleaned every part until it gleamed, reassembling it with hands that no longer trembled from doubt. Her breathing stayed slow, calm. She wasn't trying to wash something away anymore. She was honoring it. A week later, Henderson found her on the outdoor range. The general watched in silence while Sarah fired at distant steel silhouettes, each shot ringing like a bell across the valley. When Sarah finally set the rifle down, Henderson spoke. "You know they're calling you the anchor now," she said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The anchor." "The one who keeps everyone else steady," Henderson said, "even when it breaks you inside." Sarah looked away toward the horizon. The nickname felt too heavy, too final. But a part of her understood why they said it. Because she had stopped shaking, even when the ground did. The missions kept coming. Some were clean, some were not. Some ended with grateful faces and steady hands, others with empty rooms and the bitter taste of almost. But Sarah no longer measured herself by perfect shots. She measured by who made it home, by what was left standing afterward. And slowly, without meaning to, she became what Henderson had seen in her all along, not just a weapon, but a quiet constant. The one they trusted to stay when everything else came apart. But even anchors can crack. And the next mission would ask her to choose between staying steady or letting go of everything she thought she was. The orders came at midnight. Sarah was still awake, sitting on the floor of her quarters, legs crossed, rifle parts laid out in perfect lines like a ritual altar. The knock was soft. The courier said nothing, just handed her the sealed folder and left without looking at her. The weight of it felt different. Too light to be paper. Too heavy to be harmless. She broke the seal. Target: former Allied asset, current rogue, classified threat designation, termination authorized. Her breath stalled. A photograph stared up from the page. A man in his 40s, calm eyes, faint smile. And she knew him. Captain Elias Reed. He had once taught her wind calls at Fort Bragg. He had loaned her books on ballistics theory, stayed late on the range when she was too stubborn to stop practicing. He had been one of the first to say out loud what she never believed: "You're better than all of us." Now they wanted her to kill him. She didn't speak during the briefing the next day. Barnes explained in his usual clipped voice that Reed had gone dark 2 years ago, vanishing from the special operations world. Intelligence now believed he had resurfaced, coordinating black market arms deals for a hostile network. No one had been able to get close. He stayed mobile, moved alone, used dead drops and coded channels. They'd finally tracked him to a remote outpost in the mountains. Isolated, hardened, guarded. This wasn't an arrest order. This was a clean kill. Henderson wasn't in the room. Sarah wondered if that was intentional. When the meeting ended, no one looked at her. Maybe out of respect. Maybe shame. She walked out with the folder held tight in her hand, her face blank, her heart not. The mountains rose like jagged black teeth under a moonless sky. Sarah crawled into her hide 12 hours before the target was expected. Alone. No team this time, just a distant surveillance drone circling silent above the clouds. The wind howled low through the rocks, cold enough to bite her through the layers. She didn't build her shot yet. She just lay there, staring down at the compound lights far below. Her mind kept replaying pieces of memory like broken film strips. Reed laughing on the brag range, telling her to trust her instincts. Reed leaning over her shoulder, saying don't let the wind own you, make it yours. Reed clapping her on the back after her first perfect cold bore hit and saying one day, they'll trust lives to your hands. Now they had. And his was one of them. Dawn crept pale over the ridges. At 700 exactly, Reed stepped into view on the compound roof, coffee mug in hand, scanning the horizon like an old habit. He looked older, beard streaked with gray, shoulders heavier. But his eyes, they were the same. Sarah's finger hovered near the trigger. Her breathing slowed. She knew every calculation already. Distance, 1,321 meters. Wind, 4 knots from the northwest. Elevation, -9 mils. Heart rate, 56. She could end this before he took his second sip. And yet she couldn't move. Because underneath all the reasons, the intelligence reports, the authorization codes, one question rooted her still. What if they were wrong? What if he wasn't the villain they said he'd become? What if they were about to erase someone who had once saved her from herself? She whispered into the comms. Command, this is Raven. Confirm target positive. Static, then Barnes' voice. Confirmed. Her throat tightened. Request secondary verification. A pause. Colder this time. Negative, execute. She lowered her eye back to the scope. Reed turned his head just slightly, as if sensing something, and for one impossible second it felt like he was looking straight at her across the 1,000 meters. She could have pulled the trigger. Instead, she closed her eyes. She didn't fire. Not then, not when he walked back inside. Not during the next 5 hours as he moved through the compound below. She just watched, recorded, waited. And what she saw made her doubt everything. There were no arms caches. No security convoys. Just a scattering of weather-beaten structures, a handful of locals and Reed working with them, teaching, repairing radios, handing out medical supplies from worn crates marked with faded UN logos. She spoke nothing into the comms, but inside her the silence roared. At 1500 hours, a convoy of armed men rolled up from the valley. Sarah tracked them through her scope, black market insignias on their vehicles, rifles slung casual over shoulders. They went straight to Reed. Her pulse quickened. This was it. Confirmation. She zoomed in. They were shouting. Reed was shaking his head, backing away. One of the men raised his rifle. Reed moved faster than Sarah remembered he could, twisting, disarming, striking like he still belonged to the world they had shared. A gunshot cracked. Chaos. Sarah's training took over. She fired twice, precise and clean. 2 armed men dropped before they could fire into the crowd. The rest scattered, dragging their wounded back to the trucks and fleeing down the mountain road. Reed stood frozen among the villagers, weapon still in hand, chest heaving. Sarah stayed on him through her scope, heart pounding. He hadn't been selling weapons. He had been protecting them. She broke radio silence. Command, this is Raven. Target not hostile. Repeat, not hostile. Engaged hostiles attempting attack on civilians. Target defended non-combatants. The channel hissed with static before Barnes, voice cut in sharp. Raven, your mission was termination. Do you copy? Negative, she said quietly. Mission parameters no longer valid. Raven, I'm not shooting him. Silence. Then stand by. She waited, the wind clawing cold across her prone body, her crosshairs still locked on the man who had once called her the future. 5 long minutes passed. Then Henderson's voice came through, low, controlled, but carrying an edge like steel drawn slowly from a sheath. Raven exfil now. No reprimand. No explanation. Just trust. And the weight that came with it. She ghosted out of the mountains by nightfall, leaving nothing but footprints that the wind would erase. No one spoke to her during exfil. No one even looked at her. By the time she reached base, Reed had already disappeared again. Official reports said nothing about what she had done. The file was marked inconclusive and sealed. Barnes didn't call her in. Henderson did. She stood in the general's office while Henderson studied her in silence. "You disobeyed a direct order," Henderson said finally. "Yes, ma'am." "You may have saved an innocent man." "Yes, ma'am." "Or you may have let a traitor walk." Sarah's voice stayed steady. "I know." Henderson leaned back, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You made your choice. Understand, this path only gets harder from here." "I know," Sarah said again. Something flickered in Henderson's face. Not approval, not disapproval either. Something older, wearier. Then she nodded. Dismissed. That night, Sarah walked alone to the far edge of the airfield, where the floodlights faded into black and the wind came clean off the hills. She lay back on the cold tarmac, staring up at a sky so wide it felt like it could swallow her whole. For the first time since she had joined this world, she felt untethered. Not steady, not shattered. Just human. She had broken the rules to protect something she couldn't explain. And maybe that meant she no longer belonged here. Or maybe it meant she finally did. She didn't know. But she knew this. If being human ever stopped mattering, she wouldn't want to be their anchor anymore. The summons came 3 days later. No folder this time, no briefing, just Henderson's voice over the secure line. "Come to my office now." Sarah found the general standing by the window, hands behind her back, shoulders drawn tight. The blinds were half closed, stripes of cold sunlight slanting across the desk. She didn't turn when Sarah entered. "There's one more mission," Henderson said. Her voice wasn't like it had been before, not commanding, not cold. "Tired?" Sarah waited. "The council wants to shut down our unit," Henderson said. "They think this experiment has gone too far. They want proof it works, or they'll dissolve it." Sarah said nothing. "The proof," Henderson continued, finally turning to face her, "is a rescue, off the books. No authorization, no support." "Who?" "A medevac crew," Henderson said, "captured behind enemy lines during a covert delivery. No rescue attempt authorized, too risky, they say, but they're alive, for now." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "Where?" Henderson handed her a single sheet. Coordinates. Deep in a war-torn province, no-fly zone, surrounded by fortified positions. "1 woman against 100, Sarah said. "Maybe," Henderson replied, "or 1 woman against none if she waits too long." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Sarah nodded once. "Then I won't wait." She moved like she was already part of the night. Insertion was silent, halo drop at 23,000 feet, oxygen mask frosting as the world roared past her in black silence. The earth rose up like a shadow. She hit the ground running, chute already packed by the time her boots dug into the dirt. No team. No comms. Just her. The target compound loomed hours later, lit by erratic floodlights that painted broken walls and rusting trucks in shifting gold and shadow. The air smelled of cordite and rot. Guard towers framed the perimeter like jagged teeth. Sarah ghosted through the dark, crawling under razor wire, slipping between blind spots like smoke. She could hear the captured medevac crew inside, a man and woman bound to chairs, their voices hoarse from pleading. Her pulse stayed slow. She wasn't here to fight a war. She was here to end one. The first sentry never saw her. Neither did the second. She moved with surgical precision, silent strikes, suppressed shots, bodies lowered gently to the dirt. Each movement was clean but not cold. She didn't revel in it. She just made space for life to keep going where death had taken root. At the heart of the compound, she found the crew. Their eyes went wide as she cut the ropes from their wrists. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. They simply rose, trembling, clutching each other like people who had almost let go. Sarah handed them her only spare rifle. "Follow," she whispered. They moved like shadows behind her. The exfil was the hard part. Floodlights snapped on. Alarms screamed. The compound ignited like a kicked beehive. Tracers shredded the night. Sarah didn't break stride. She carved a path through chaos. Precision shots, fast and quiet, her world shrinking to the space just ahead of their feet. Every decision was instinct, every heartbeat an equation she solved without thinking. She didn't think about dying. She thought about keeping their feet moving. They made it to the perimeter wall. A flare burst overhead, painting everything red. "Run," Sarah said. They ran. The gunship came for them at dawn. Henderson had found a way, pulled strings Sarah didn't want to imagine. The medevac crew clung to each other in the cargo bay as the chopper roared away from the valley, sunlight spilling over the horizon like liquid fire. Sarah sat apart from them, helmet in her lap, eyes fixed on the fatting compound below. It was quiet now. It always was afterward. They touched down on base 3 hours later. Barnes was waiting, so was half the task force. No one cheered. No one clapped. They just stood as the medevac crew stumbled off the ramp alive, their eyes shining wet in the morning light. Henderson stepped forward. For once she smiled. "Proof enough," she said softly. Sarah nodded, exhausted beyond words. She handed over her rifle, like setting down the weight of an entire world. That night the armory was empty. Sarah stood alone at her workbench one last time, the Barrett stretched across the table, bathed in a pool of warm light. Her hands moved slowly, reverently, over each piece as she disassembled it, cleaned it, reassembled it. Like she had done 1,000 times. Like a prayer. But tonight was different. She wasn't preparing for war. She was saying goodbye. She walked out into the open air just before dawn, duffel slung over her shoulder, boots crunching on the gravel. The sky was pale and endless. A few early birds skimmed the hangars. Somewhere far behind her, the base loudspeakers crackled awake. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Henderson found her at the gate. "You're leaving," the general said. Sarah nodded. "I have to." "Where will you go?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Home, I think, wherever that is now." Henderson studied her for a long time. Then she raised her hand and saluted. No words. No orders. Just a single, silent gesture. Sarah returned the salute. And walked away. Weeks later, she was just another face in a small mountain town. She bought groceries, sat by the lake at dawn, called her parents and let them cry quietly on the phone. She slept without nightmares for the first time in years. She didn't tell anyone who she had been. She didn't need them to know. Every so often, she found herself standing on the back porch at night, looking up at the stars. The same sky she had once stared at through a scope. Only now, she let them be stars again. She never wore the badge anymore. The one that had started it all. But sometimes, when she caught sight of it tucked away in a drawer, she smiled. Not with pride, not with regret. with something quieter, something steadier, the kind of peace that isn't loud, the kind that has been earned. Because in the end, it had never really been about the perfect shot. It had been about choosing what deserved to be protected, even when it cost her everything, even when no one would ever know. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and then it walks away, quietly, steadily, into the light.